and welcome. My name is Jeff Roberts and I'll be your host for this edition of Time for a Slow Burn. This program is a monthly event and we will discuss topics of interest to the southeastern corner of Wisconsin, the state, and of course nationally. Topics can be just about anything. Usually something that starts off as a discussion, a debate, or just a plain old-fashioned yelling match between friends and neighbors. It's surprising what can get a person all riled up. Sadly, it's usually something about local or national politics, a program we've witnessed, or something that we've seen firsthand. Sometimes, it's just a rumor. For our first topic, I thought it'd be good to revisit one of my favorite subjects, climate change. Recently, we've seen and heard the professional politicians and 3 of 4 of the major media outlets add quite a lot of discussion about how climate deniers should be investigated for their views. Really? Investigated? The situation is rather disturbing to me. It makes me wonder just what's going on in Washington, D.C. Let's take a moment and set the Wayback Machine to December 15th, 1791. The Bill of Rights was just adopted by the American government and is included the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, in which we have freedom of speech and freedom of the press. Now remember, in those days, wood and coal were used to heat homes and businesses. Black soot and grime were everywhere, so there were horrible carbon emissions. But according to empirical scientific evidence, not the made-up junk science we hear from the media and some scientists on the government dole, the climate has not changed due to massive CO2 emissions, called greenhouse gases. Instead, the climate goes through climate cycles. What do you think about that? But that seems that 225 years since the Bill of Rights was first adopted by our government, the Washington insiders, thugs, and criminals have taken over, and our Constitution and Bill of Rights means very little. We currently have a sitting president who thinks he alone makes laws and edicts that are granted by the powers, not by our founding fathers. So those documents are so painstakingly crafted and to lead and guide us through 200 years plus. But we now have what amounts to an imperial sitting in Washington who leads by the pen. If you disagree with his distinguished point of view, especially since he's a constitutional lawyer and professor, you should be investigated. Oh wait, that was a lie. He was not a professor, and he was a guest lecturer. He was also described by his colleagues as being lazy and inept. That's why he could never afford a permanent position or was never offered one at any college or university in America. Maybe that's why he became a community organizer. In other words, he had a made-up job title to fill a resume with more mindless blather. Well, far be it from us, mere mortals, to disagree with such a profound deity. We should all be silent and listen to the climate change terrorist with a loud enough voice to drown out any opposing view, because the science is settled. Wait a minute, really? Well now, according to climate terrorists, we should all be investigated and tried in a court of law. My question is, tried for what? Just having an opposing viewpoint? Newsflash, you brain jackasses. The Bill of Rights guarantees us the right to have an opposing view. Here's a factoid for you meatbags. The United States has had a two-party system since the Founding Fathers first sat down together and developed our form of government. That two-party system has had its share of disagreements, then as well as today. Remember, this is a system that put King Barry in the White House for almost 8 years. This is a system that allowed King Barry to lie to the American people about his so-called signature health care law and the system that he put into place, and how much of a benefit it would be. That system, Barry and his minions from Congress pushed on America. You know the one, the Congress that was told by then Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, just sign it, read it later. That legislation has failed to meet any of its own expectations. Few, if any, have reaped the promised rewards of quality health care at an affordable price. Instead, insurance premiums have gone up and quality of life down. Insurance companies have not completed for our healthcare dollars as we were told they would. Hospitals and doctors have dropped out of the so-called healthcare provider network by the thousands. Insurance providers have bypassed Obamacare and have offered instead private health care for those who can afford it. And the rates they choose, not what Obamacare premiums are selected for them. And the deductibles have gone up every year since that law's inception. So your signature legislation has failed. You've lied to America about affordable side of health care premiums and how people or how insurance companies and hospitals will flock to get your insurance program off the ground. Yet you expect us, the American people, to actually believe the rubbish you and your minions spew about climate change and its effect on our planet. What a joke of a president you have been as President of the United States. Fact, the overall temperature of the planet has not risen. It's risen less than 1 degree Fahrenheit since records have been kept, not the 10 degrees predicted by your so-called climate scientist a few years ago. And let's not forget everyone's favorite Oscar winner, Al Gore, the pride of the Democratic Party and champion of climate change terrorists everywhere. Fact, all plant life on Earth requires CO2 for photosynthesis, yet CO2 is the so-called villain in the greenhouse gas tug-of-war. Fact, the last mini ice age was between 1645 and 715, and we may be headed for another one in less than a decade. That's scary, isn't it? Another mini ice age? FYI, mini ice ages they happen because of solar cycles on the surface of the sun, not man-made greenhouse gases on Earth. The so-called climate change scientists have been unable to empirically prove climate change is caused by man-made greenhouse gases. Instead, they scream louder than anyone else to get attention to their cause and more donations based on fear. But the lack of fact has never slowed them down, even though they can't prove their point of view is correct. For a number of years, scientists have grappled with the truth about what is real and what is made up for the pockets, or to help line the pockets of some very enterprising companies. Companies that specialize in environmentally friendly products and tout their new technology, even though that technology does not exist right now, nor in the near future. But climate change believers still chase after that unknown because it happens to suit their version of the facts. Even President Barry himself plays that silly shell game. According to Barry, the science is settled. Really? Since when? Since you said so? To that I say, Barry, BS. Hey, but don't take my word for it. You should remember over the past 3 years, several of my guests and a few guest lecturers from Prager University have spoken on the topic of climate change. Some have spoken about the damage many climate change alarmists have done with their radical viewpoints, rhetorical nonsense, and how we have changed the way we view the actual facts and deal with the real data to seek the truth, whatever the heck that is. Not the trumped-up rubbish His Royal Highness Barry uses to scare everyone into driving electric cars that throw away billions of dollars in greenhouse energy sources that do not exist anywhere. These and many other types of inventions are still being planned, but they're still blue sky projects. The majority of the companies who receive taxpayer dollars for research have gone out of business. Their plans for development had no scientific basis or meaning at the time, or the next 10 years, or even longer. So they went out of business and the money disappeared. Gee, I wonder where it went. In other words, the stuff just doesn't exist, nor will it for the foreseeable future. Now that got me thinking. What about the ethical scientists? What do they think about climate change? Is it real or not? Are we endangering ourselves as climate terrorists think or shout out? To answer that question, I would like to introduce Richard Lindzen, an MIT atmospheric physicist and one who is actually on top of the world of scientific exploration. And he's a climate expert. Let's see what he has to say about climate change. You might be surprised. So here we go.
I'm an atmospheric physicist. I've published more than 200 scientific papers. For 30 years, I taught at MIT, during which time the climate has changed remarkably little. But the cry of global warming has grown ever more shrill. In fact, it seems that the less the climate changes, the louder the voices of the climate alarmists get. So let's clear the air and create a more accurate picture of where we really stand on the issue of global warming, or, as it is now called, climate change. There are basically three groups of people dealing with this issue. Groups 1 and 2 are scientists. Group 3 consists mostly at its core of politicians, environmentalists, and media. Group 1 is associated with the scientific part of the United Nations International Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC Working Group 1. These are scientists who mostly believe that recent climate change is primarily due to man's burning of fossil fuels, oil, coal, and natural gas. This releases CO2, carbon dioxide, into the atmosphere, and they believe this might eventually dangerously heat the planet. Group 2 is made up of scientists who don't see this as an especially serious problem. This is the group I belong to. We're usually referred to as skeptics. We note that there are many reasons why the climate changes: the sun, clouds, oceans, the orbital variations of the Earth, as well as a myriad of other inputs. None of these is fully understood, and there is no evidence that CO2 emissions are the dominant factor. But actually, there is much agreement between both groups of scientists. The following are such points of agreement. 1. The climate is always changing. 2. CO2 is a greenhouse gas without which life on Earth is not possible, but adding it to the atmosphere should lead to some warming. 3. Atmospheric levels of CO2 have been increasing since the end of the Little Ice Age in the 19th century. 4. Over this period, past 2 centuries, the global mean temperature has increased slightly and erratically by about 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit or 1 degree Celsius. But only since the 1960s have man's greenhouse emissions been sufficient to play a role. 5. Given the complexity of climate, no confident prediction about future global mean temperature or its impact can be made. The IPCC acknowledged in its own 2007 report that, quote, the long-term prediction of future climate states is not possible, end quote. Most importantly, the scenario that the burning of fossil fuels leads to catastrophe isn't part of what either group asserts. So why are so many people worried, indeed panic-stricken, about this issue? Here's where Group 3 comes in: the politicians, environmentalists, and media. Global warming alarmism provides them, more than any other issue, with the things they most want. For politicians, it's money and power. For environmentalists, it's money for their organizations and confirmation of their near religious devotion to the idea that man is a destructive force acting upon nature. And for the media, it's ideology, money, and headlines. Doomsday scenarios sell. Meanwhile, over the last decade, scientists outside of climate physics have jumped on the bandwagon, publishing papers blaming global warming for everything from acne to the Syrian civil war. And crony capitalists have eagerly grabbed for the subsidies that governments have so lavishly provided. Unfortunately, Group 3 is winning the argument because they have drowned out the serious debate that should be going on. But while politicians, environmentalists, and media types can waste a lot of money and scare a lot of people, they won't be able to bury the truth. The climate will have the final word on that. I'm Richard Lindzen, Emeritus Professor of Atmospheric Sciences at MIT for Prager University.
Welcome back. Recently, one of my favorite authors, Thomas Sowell, did a piece that appeared in the Patriot Post. It's called Winners and Whiners. Thomas covered the state of national politics pretty well, and he was correct in his assumption regarding the Democrats and Republicans, who the winners are and who are the whiners. And sometimes it's tough to tell the difference. For the Democrats, Bernie is the surprise candidate that could be the nominee for the Democrats at their convention. Maybe. For the Republicans, Trump is far enough out in front of the mainstream Republicans to be nervous, make them all very nervous indeed. But Ted Cruz is closing in. Might get a surprise there. Although Ted Cruz is not the candidate of choice for many, he is the lesser of evils when it comes to Trump or either of the two Democrats. Trump and his foolish antics have alienated most of the Republicans and forced the independents to take a closer look at Cruz as their alternative. Trump is a blowhard who loves to hear himself talk and does so at every opportunity. He doesn't care if he sounds like a petulant child. He just runs his mouth and the crowds love him for it. Sadly, Trump couldn't manage his way out of a wet paper bag, let alone run America as president. We have to remember, Trump has been divorced and filed for bankruptcy 4 times in his so-called real estate empire, or non-empire. You choose which one fits best. I think it depends on the situation. That's not the only candidate we need to run this country. He's not the one that we're looking for, I think, especially when he whines about the Republican establishment, but offers no real solutions to our nation's issues. He just plays the crowd, and they love him for it. On the Democratic side, oh boy, what choices do we have? Let's see. We've had about enough of the spend without shame by the Democrats, especially from the Obama administration. After 7.5 years, the national debt will roll over $20 trillion before Obama leaves office. That's his legacy as president. George Bush could only manage to run up a debt of an additional $4 trillion when he left office. His total was $10.4 trillion altogether. With the Democrat in the Oval Office now, we have a healthcare system riddled with tax penalties that have ruined at least our healthcare system for the next 10 years. 10 years at the very least, that is. That's what the healthcare and insurance experts claim it will take to fix the mess we have in our healthcare industry, back to where it was before Obamacare destroyed it. Forget all the European-style healthcare mist and crap about we've been subjected to for the last few years. That system doesn't work in Europe. Take a look at the countries that are bankrupt and see why. So what makes you think even for a second that mess would work here? Really, take the 5th largest portion of our economy, break it, and try to build it into something resembled the mess in Europe. Such a deal. Well, that's precisely what Bernie Sanders, a socialist by the way, parading around as a Democrat, wants to do. And just like his Royal Highness King Barry, the young people in the campaign crowds love him for it, because he says it'll be free. Wow, how gullible can you get? So tell me, Bernie, who's going to pay for the free health care, the free college tuition, and all the other freebies you're trying to sell as your campaign says? I think we know the answer. We know especially the answer to that one. It's going to be the American taxpayer. So that means, by the way, Bernie has no foreign policy experience, nor does he have any domestic policy experience. He's a senator from New Hampshire, for crying out loud. What kind of experience could he have? But then we have Hillary. She has experience in screwing up everything she touches when it comes to foreign policy. Remember Benghazi? Remember when she told the Congressional Committee, what difference does it make now? And threw a tantrum when she did it. It makes a lot of difference to the families of the slain ambassador and his security detail. Wait a second. Can you remember any foreign policy matter that she was involved in that didn't backfire? Can you say trend? And what about the mouthpiece for all things harsh and filled with guile? After all, we are talking about Mr. Donald Trump, of course. If something happens he doesn't like, he'll fire you. If he can't fire you, he'll build a wall around you and stop you from coming in. Oh wait, we have one of those. It's called the U.S. border between U.S. and Mexico. The Border Patrol and ICE have to let the criminals and the illegal immigrants in because King Barry said so. But we have a wall. That wall doesn't work either. Get the message, Trump? Now, don't get me wrong. Trump has his followers, the same as King Barry had his during his 2 general elections. They were all young and idealistic, just like Trump and Bernie's followers are now. But what happens when the news wears off? And all those who voted for Bernie realize they're going to get the bill for those freebies that weren't free. But he promised them, didn't he? Or what happens if Trump actually wins a nomination and then possibly the election? Who gets stuck with the bill for building that new wall Trump wants? Or anything else he decides to dream up as we get closer to Election Day? You notice how little he has mentioned about his foreign policy during his campaign and what his administration would look like. Strangely silent. I don't know why. Have you ever noticed how he whines about the election being stolen away from him before the Republican convention even gets started? I think someone in his campaign forgot to inform him that the Republican Party decides the rules and how the delegates will be awarded, not Donald Trump. That's where Thomas Sowell has defined this topic quite nicely, and very clearly too, I might add. Thomas has actually given us a reason to pause and think about our choices this general election. Do we want a 4 times bankrupt, dethroned real estate kingpin running America, just like he did his failed casinos and all of his real estate businesses? Or do we want someone who would be willing to run America into bankruptcy just to show how great socialism is for America, just like the Eastern countries have done, one right after another, and that spread to the Western countries of Europe, one right after another? If you don't believe me, take a look at Greece, Spain, France, Italy, and so forth and so on. Or do we want Her Royal Highness Queen Hillary? She has no foreign policy success as Secretary of State, no domestic policy success as a U.S. Senator. Clinton lied to the American people nearly every day of her campaign about her email server and its contents. She lied about what was going on the servers and if it was classified or not, about how it was erased and subsequently recovered, much to her chagrin. The FBI continues to nip at her heels, and the Justice Department and President Obama continue to promise not to interfere with the FBI probe. Well, we'll see if that's the case. If she suddenly gets a pardon of her indictment or not. I wonder just how far the Justice Department will allow it to go forward before it will step in to save the day for Queen Hillary. Maybe Her Highness just needs to get knocked off her perch and have to face not only America's justice system, but for the first time, and be stripped of her husband's armor, she would have to face the American people as well, and do it all by herself for the things that she's done dirt cheap and behind closed doors. To that, all I can say is, we'll have to wait and see, won't we? Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Are you camera shy but would like to get behind the scenes of the fun-filled world of television production? Then Kenosha TV just might be the place for you. Every week, your friends and neighbors on Kenosha TV create new programs. We always need people like you to help direct the shows, man the cameras, tweak the audio, and have a great time in producing programming for Kenosha viewers. No experience is necessary. Kenosha TV provides the training and equipment for you. For more information, give us a call or go to our website.
Welcome back. Our next topic is along the lines of the 2 topics we have covered already today, and that is government too big? One of my favorite subjects too. There are 2 sides to this argument, and the argument has raged since America was first founded. Size and scope of our government depends on many different factors, much of which is rooted in how our new form of government was actually created, and of course, our belief system. But as with all government functions, its size is appropriate to the amount of government interference we can experience. But the question becomes, when is government too big? And when is government not big enough? How can we decide? Well, to help with that very question, we have William Vogeli, senior editor of the Claremont Review of Books. So let's watch his little brief encounter with big government and see what he has to say.
Ever since Franklin Roosevelt promised Americans a New Deal in 1932, liberal politicians and pundits have insisted that the government must do more to alleviate poverty, increase economic security, and enhance the quality of life. But the word more implies there's a level of government activity that would be enough In reality, however, there's never enough. That's because the liberal theory and practice of activist government is an endless pursuit of a goal that can't be achieved. When was the last time you heard a liberal politician say, "Yeah, we solved that social ill. We're just going to close up that government agency now, zero out the budget, and move on to another problem"? What you hear instead is that we need more. And more always sets the stage for still more down the road. Liberalism's lack of a limiting principle raises two questions. First, can our republic govern itself on this basis? Second, should it? My answers are maybe and no. Maybe we can go on, at least for a while, to continue to expand entitlement spending. We've been doing it for decades. Adjusted for inflation and population growth, government spending, federal, state, and local, was nearly 7 times as large in 2014 as it was in 1948. That sounds like a perfect example of the economist's adage, if something can't go on forever, it won't. In 1948, government spending amounted to 17%, just over 1/6 of our gross domestic product, the total value of all the goods and services produced by the American economy that year. In 2014, government spending was 32% of GDP, just under 1/3. This trend puts us on a steady course to a European social democracy, one where government spends more than 50% of GDP. Europe is straining under this burden. France, for example, the third largest economy in the European Union, has stagnant growth and unemployment twice as high as America's. Even nations with stronger economies, such as Sweden and Germany, face the dilemma of welfare states around the world. The number of workers paying taxes continues to decline, while the number of beneficiaries, those who receive government benefits, continues to grow. America has the same problem. As it is, government spending on social welfare and insurance programs, the part of the budget liberals like best, is crowding out everything else. Such spending accounted for 72% of federal outlays in 2014, twice the proportion in 1969. Common sense suggests this can't go on indefinitely. Which brings us to the second question. Should America govern itself on this basis? That is, should America become like Europe? Liberals say yes, conservatives say no. Conservatives insist that the European model is wrong for America, even if we can afford it. The key to this argument is that America's founding did not just establish a government, but defined a nation with a distinct character. Healthy skepticism of government, even when it announces the intention to use its power benevolently, is a central feature of that character. The "don't tread on me" spirit that animated the founding remains strong. Most Americans persist in believing that a government powerful enough to give you everything you want will also, necessarily, be powerful enough to take away everything you have, including your freedom. Conservatives believe that government power must be limited because the alternative is unlimited government. Liberals don't share this concern. If there's a social problem, they believe the best solution is a new government program. If it fails to achieve its goal, which it invariably does, the solution is a bigger government program, more. And when does more become enough? The honest answer is never. I'm Bill Vogley of the Claremont Institute for Prager University.
Welcome back. Well, that's it for another edition of Time for a Slow Burn. Tune in next time for topics of interest that tend to burn your hide. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.